Okay, so I've been looking forward to this since I first got invited back. And I want to introduce Kristen, who I'm sure all of you know, but I want to tell you how I met Kristen. The first time we met personally was on the telephone. And I think this was shortly after I'd given my first talk to an RWA group, which was actually at Nationals in Atlanta. Shortly after that, I get a call, and she said, "Hi, my name's Kristan Higgins. I'm with the Connecticut chapter, the Romance Writers, and we wondered if you'd like to come and talk to our chapter." And I said, "Absolutely." And so we worked out all the details, and then I said, you know, it would probably be a lot more fun if I took a novel written by somebody in your chapter and used it as an example along with the movie clips I show and the movies I use and so on. And she said, okay. And I said, is there anybody in your chapter who's been published who the members would be familiar with? And she said, yeah, there's a few. And I said, well, what about you? Because you're going to all this work. Have you ever been published? And she said, well, yeah. And I said, well, maybe we could use one of your books. And I've always appreciated that at no point in the conversation did she say, don't you know who I am?
Because
Rita Award?
Nobody at the time.
You were somebody. I think you'd already you'd won awards, you were multi-published and so on. But what did I know? So it turned out we actually did that, and we used Catch of the Day back then, and it was great fun. So the first thing I said when I got invited back is, I don't even think I called you to say. I said, oh, and if I'm coming, Kristen's coming, and I'm going to analyze one of her books, and she's going to join me on stage. And they said, okay. And I said, I'll call her and make sure she can do that, because I gave her no choice. So here she is. So here's the way this is going to go. I'm going to, you can actually set that down, because, you know, this is really all about me still. Let's not make any mistake about that. What I'm going to do is, I want to talk about her book, and I'm going to go through those questions that all of you had to answer, and I'm just going to, let's see if, this is aggravatingly feeding back. Let's see how this book compares to the questions we asked. After I talk, then Kristen has carefully prepared some remarks, and she's going to talk about the process of creating the book and what she went through, and then I have some questions for her, and then we'll open it up, and you can ask any questions you want of her about this or any other book or her career or whatever you'd like to be. But first, I'd like to wonder if I just set that there, can you hear me okay? Yes. In the back? Much better. Okay, so let's just take a look at those core questions and see how they might apply to the next best thing. So the first one is, who is the hero? Okay, that's easy. That's Lucy. And what is the setup? Well, basically the setup is she's working at Bunny's. She's the bread baker in the group. She's a member of this family that has become known as the Black Widows. She lives in this town of Mackerly. And all of that is really revealed very quickly in the book. So even though the opening of the book is out of sequence chronologically, you might say, it actually opens with the opportunity, which I'll get to in a second, in my opinion. This is all my opinion, so we're going to find out later if her first words are, "You are so full of shit," then we'll know that she doesn't see her book quite the way I do. But all of this gets out of the way pretty quickly, and also very quickly we feel empathetic for her. I mean, the opening line of the whole book, did I say movie? The opening line of the whole book is, you have a whisker. So immediately we start feeling, immediately it's like this, yes, very minor, but this kind of crisis that we feel sorry for, and of course that represents a whole bigger issue for her of getting older and being able to have kids of her own and so on. But then we learn she is the victim of undeserved misfortune when we hear about the death of, I'm bad with Michael, right? Jimmy. Okay.
That's you.
I thought, yes, no. I was quite honored that she did name a character after me until I realized it was a cat called Fat Mikey. And I thought, yeah, I have to be nicer to this woman before she writes another book. Okay, so Jimmy, it's the death of Jimmy. She's one of the Black Widows, and so we feel sorry for her. That's the biggest thing. She is very likable, obviously very devoted to her family. She's nice to everybody she encounters, loves her sister, loves the baby. Everything about her seems like a very kind, loving, nice person. And there's a degree of jeopardy, because remember, that means danger of loss of something of vital importance. And even though the whisker is kind of a joke, and she goes into this sort of monologue about, what if I'm going to whisker, I must be getting early menopause, pretty soon I'll be shaving, and then I'm going to dry up like an old loaf of bread. But the real jeopardy is, I'm never going to have a family of my own. Because I missed that chance with Jimmy. He died so quickly, and that could never happen. And so she is really in this kind of jeopardy that she's not going to have this thing that she wants. And then the next thing, and it's not on the list of questions, but I could have but you should weave it in, as I said yesterday, to the setup, and that is, does the character long for anything? Remember, longing is a deeply held desire, something your heroine wants, but she's just paying lip service to it. She's not really doing what is necessary to go after it. And so I'm going to read you a select highlight here. She says on page 14, I love the bakery, and the bread I create is proof of a beneficent God, but it's fair to say that if circumstances were different, I wouldn't work here. And then she goes on to say what she really would like to be. What she really likes to make is desserts. She'd like to be a pastry chef. That's what she studied for, and so on. So she says this is something she wants, but she's really clearly not doing anything to go after that goal. It's just, it's either you could qualify it as a pipe dream, or she's paying lip service to it, because pretty much she's told herself, well, that can't happen, because she was relegated to bread baker. But she also says, bread baking is a Zen-like art, not fully grasped by much of the world, an art I've come to love. And she goes on and she talks often about how much satisfaction she gets baking bread. But it's not desserts. And when you start thinking about how someone is stuck in your story, and I find this echoes through the entire novel. This is something that I found true. And that is this idea that the enemy of the great is not the terrible. The enemy of the great is the good. The enemy of the wonderful is the okay. It's not that she's not Cinderella. She's not slaving over a stove doing something she hates and, oh, I just wish I could. No, she's found a comfort zone where she's getting to do something she indeed does like. But it's not her dream. It's not what would really fulfill her the most. So she's settling, which is very much the same thing as being stuck. And I think one of the strong things about this character is, in the early part of the story, we see all the different ways that Lucy is stuck, that she's in a state of stasis. And some of them are sort of blatant, like she's stuck in this job and kind of stuck with this family that is, on the one hand, loving in its way, but also very restrictive, very controlling. But also in some more subtle or symbolic ways. One is the idea that she loves making desserts and she can't taste them. So she only makes them for other people. There's no point in making them for herself because they have no taste to her. Another way she's stuck is she's stuck whenever she gets to the edge of the cemetery. Because when it's like she can't walk through the cemetery because then she would have to go past Jimmy's grave. And it's just too hard. In other words, she can't get past Jimmy. And she has a closet filled with apparently expensive clothes. She says they're expensive, I don't know, clothes, but she says that, and she doesn't wear them. And what she does spend her time doing, besides, sleeping with Ethan and making bread, is watching her wedding video over and over and over again. All of those things show that this is somebody who's just kind of mired in the present. That's her hamster wheel. And this is where she is when we meet her. Then, next question is, what's the opportunity? To me, the opportunity is the birth of her sister's baby. And notice that it's the opening scene of the book. And it's a good illustration of what I said yesterday when I said, look at the structure chart, but if you're a novelist, just lay out your story chronologically, and then you can mess with it because you want to come in on something possibly that has greater emotion. And when we when we hear or read all about her life with the Black Widows and her baking and her sleeping with Ethan and certainly her backstory, but even if you left out the backstory, probably, if in chronological order, the birth of her niece would probably be around the 10% point. Percentages aren't exact when it comes to novels, but we'll get back to the percentages in a minute. But what Kristen does is she puts it up front because it gets things, it creates conflict immediately. Well, first of all, it's a big moment for the family, but more than that, it creates immediate conflict. Because the opportunity creates in your heroine some initial desire. It's something that's never happened to the character before that creates a desire to move into some new situation. And that combined with the you have a whisker is, oh my God, I'm getting older, I'm totally envious of my sister, and she gets to have this baby, even though she's a younger sister, because that adds even more pressure, makes it even more important. Things aren't going in the order that they normally would. And so her preliminary goal is, I think I should start dating. She's thinking, I know someday, again someday I'm going to have a family of my own. She puts here, there's on that same page, just one sec, or on the next page, she says, she's looking at her face in the mirror, looking at herself in the mirror, and she says, strawberry blonde hair, pulled in a ponytail, light brown eyes. Jimmy called them, or whiskey eyes, Jimmy used to call them, freckles. It's a friendly face. I think I'd make someone a very cute mom. I've always wanted a family, a few kids. So again, she's laying in this desire, I want to have that someday. So the opportunity creates this desire, I'm going to move into the world of dating. And so her new situation is, after deciding to do that, she's got to figure out, how do I deal with this new world? So it's not like the next day she goes up to a guy and says, can we go out for a date? She hardly has a chance to do that because everybody else immediately tries to fix her up. But it's all about, what do I do? And so she starts talking about it. She mentions it to the Black Widows, and then they start introducing her to every male who comes into the bakery, and her friend, Parker, who's encouraging about it, and so on. And finally, she, in the new situation, then she takes the action of going on this speed dating. I don't think you called it that exactly, but that's, the round robin thing, musical chairs dating situation, which is a disaster. But you notice how gradually she's moving in and figuring out what are the rules of this world and so on. But she has another thing she decides immediately when she enters the world, and that is, I've got to stop sleeping with Ethan. I can't put myself on the dating market and still be having this casual sex with him. So she says, we got to stop this to Ethan. So all of that is in that stage too. All of that is in the new situation. And then comes the change of plans. Or then comes the moment when it's like she formulates early in the new situation, or right after the opportunity puts her in the new situation. She says, I should probably start dating. And she figures out how to do that. So that preliminary desire is there, but it doesn't really turn into direct action on her part until she gets asked out on her first date. by Charlie. I think if I measured that right, it's Charlie. And she actually, the first date with Charlie, or when he first asks her out and she agrees, is page 105. Why is that funny?
It's a little slow.
No.
Taking my time.
Well, no, you're doing it just right. It's what I'm going to point out.
That's exactly what I meant.
Yes, that's right. Because she knew that it's roughly, this book is about 400 pages long. I think it's just shy of that. And even though I said the percentages are for screenwriters and you don't want to get locked into those as novelists, again and again when I've read romance fiction, I have found that the percentages are not really that far off. And in this case, so that's slightly more. I guess you did take your time because it was actually about 10 pages beyond 25%, but it's at the 1/4 mark. It's the difference between thinking about dating and looking for potential dates at a speed dating thing and talking it and actually going on that first date. So now she's in the pursuit thing. Now she goes out with him and has sort of a boring, pleasant, but non-eventful date, and so on. And also, it is the beginning of the pursuit of her actual outer motivation. See, her outer motivation, dating, has neither a finish line. It's not like we're waiting the whole book for her to go on one date. That's just, it's when she goes on the first date, it's the first step towards her ultimate goal, and that is, I want to find a husband. I want to get married. Or I want to at least find the guy who I'm going to marry and be with him. I want that relationship. She never really declares, well, she knows she wants to be married because she wants to have kids, but whether you call it she wants to be married by the finish line or she wants to be engaged or just be with the guy, it's that kind of thing. But we know when she's with the guy who's the man of her dreams or her destiny, then that will be the end of the journey, that will be the climax. So that's what she's actually pursuing. But there's a second outer motivation, as there must be, because this is a romance fiction, and that is she starts pursuing Ethan. And it's one of those situations we've talked about a lot. Her pursuit of him is sort of the non-pursuit. It's like 100 pages of denial. But we're very aware of it, and she's the denial is repetitive. I mean, it just not in a bad way, but I mean, every time she sees Ethan or thinks of Ethan in these situations or so on, she has these stirrings of real attraction and love for him, which she then pushes down because that's not acceptable. Okay, which we will find out more about as the story progresses. So even though she is not knocking on his door and saying, you're the one, I want you, let's us start dating, I want to marry you, she could never do any of those things. We as the readers know that's what we want to happen. We're rooting for it, and we can see that in spite of the fact they've stopped sleeping together, he still seems ever present and they keep being thrown together, and he's her best, one of her two best friends, and so on. So clearly her ultimate goal that she will have to embrace and accept is she wants to win the love of him. But separate from that, she's trying to find a husband out in the rest of the world where it can be easy and simple and not really that risky or whatever. Okay, so she is pursuing those things simultaneously. And when you ask the question, what is the outer conflict, there's a few things. One is, when she goes on these dates with these guys, they're all bad. I mean, the best you could say about any date she has is it's pleasant. If she's not, on a date, when she's not with Ethan. And also, she's dealing with a certain amount of either disapproval from her family, like, why would you want to do this? It's like they don't say it in so many words, but I think the aunts and her mother, not so much. Her mother is a black widow, but not really so much like her two aunts are, but it's like, there's kind of this attitude as, well, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to be different than we are? You had that meal. You got married, and yeah, he died, but that's what guys do in our family. And so now it's time to just, accept that, and why would you want to do that? But at the same time, they don't say, no, you can't. then they create a different kind of conflict, and that is they say, well, if you want that, we're going to help. And every guy comes in the door, they say, would you like to date her? She wants to date. These old guys and doofuses and so on. So that's not really helping her accomplish her goal. So there's certain kind of conflict there too. And then, of course, you could possibly call this an inner conflict as much as outer, but there's the fact that even on the outer level, she really loves Ethan. And so that's really getting between her and this goal of going out and dating, regular guys who she's not related to and so on. So that's it. But then we get to the inner journey for the character, which is, as always, where it really gets fun. So if you go to the level of inner conflict and go through those elements, the first question is, what is her wound? Now, that's a pretty easy one. If this were a quiz, I'd expect everybody to get that one right, and that is the death of Jim. Because it is archetypally wounding, not just because it's a death, but because of the way it has affected her. Remember, it's an unhealed source of pain, and she not only is not in denial, she sort of embraces it as unhealed. A lot of times, like when I use Good Will Hunting as an example, when you have a wound from the past, a character will almost never say, "Oh, I forgot that happened." They always say, it's always sort of like, "Oh yeah, but that was in the past," in some version. So yeah, my father beat me, but that was then. I'm over it. I don't think about it. I don't worry about it. That'd be Will Hunting. But she sort of is the opposite of that. She almost wears a badge and say wounded, or you can picture one of those buttons that says Jimmy died, and she wears that all over the place. Okay, so as a result of that wound, then she acquired or adopted a belief. And you could phrase this in different ways. The way I phrase it is, I'm a black widow. It's the belief that, well, I'm just like my aunts and my mother, and I don't know if she actually uses the word curse, but it's sort of like that. It's sort of like, yeah, that was my fate. I'm one of the blacks, and our husbands die, and that happened to me. So, but the real belief is that should I ever get that close to anyone else again, they will die too, and I won't be able to stand that. It's exactly what Will, the character in Notting Hill, was saying. And I don't think my heart could, and I certainly expect this would happen, my heart was crushed again, I don't think I could survive that. That wasn't exactly the line of dialogue, but it's that idea. So she believes that, of course, if this happens. So then her fear, it grows out of that belief, is not only of taking any risk, but of hooking up with any guy who takes any risk. So the pool of eligible bachelors are only those who have office jobs and live a very safe, sedentary. They're practically driving a car is as risky as they can be, because otherwise it's more likely to happen. So she's afraid of risk because she's afraid of loss, because she's afraid of that to happen. And of course, underneath it all, her biggest fear is experiencing real love again. Because of those other beliefs, then her belief is to experience real love would really open myself up to pain of unimaginable level, because I've already been through it once and I barely survived, and I couldn't survive it again. And so she creates an identity. And again, this keeps coming back, but I wrote the same thing down for identity as I did for her belief, and that is she becomes a black widow. She is living her life exactly like they are. Her identity is, I'm the widow who is in this job. All I care about is baking my bread and living this nice, sort of comfortable existence. But it's fairly clear, because everybody in town is surprised that she would want to date again, which would be, in most situations in the real world, not that big of a shock. It's been 5 years, 4 or 5. Okay, so, but in this town, they know that this is who she is. This is who you are. This is her identity, and it's who she believes herself to be. A black widow who is destined or condemned to live this little existence. It's your hero's comfort zone is also their prison. And so your hero at the beginning of the story in some way is living small. It's like they're confined. Their comfort zone, their identity is like a very small room that they're trapped in or imprisoned in, but it's a prison of their own making. It's like that image I mentioned yesterday and while you were sleeping. It's just that wonderful symbolic image of her selling tickets and behind these bars. I mean, it's fairly blatant, but it works. Because that's what her existence is. It's this small thing. But then the last question is, what is her essence? And her essence is, again, if you stripped all that fear and emotional armor away, who would be left? Who does she have the potential to become? And that's fairly easy to see. She has the potential to be someone who is very loving, fully capable of connection, who could be a wonderful mate, a wonderful mother, and also on the other goal level, because this comfort zone just doesn't extend to the love story. It also extends to this longing she has to be a pastry chef. She's embracing this job baking bread that she talks about. She tells herself, oh, I like this. She does. But she's still trapped in that bakery. That bakery is her little ticket booth. And as long as she stays there, as long as she's stuck there, she's not going to go anywhere, but she has the potential to be a pastry chef like she always dreamed of being, because she makes all these great desserts. I mean, there's no question that she has the ability to do that. So if you stripped away the armor, her essence is both loving, connected, fully committed woman in a relationship, but also pastry chef, if you want to go with that outer motivation. Okay, so going back to the structure of the story then, to me the point of no return, there's actually two things that happen in succession that constitute what I would call the point of no return. Now the point of no return is an event that occurs that happens to a character, and then they react to that event by making a bigger commitment to the outer motivation. The event that happens is Boggy dies. The comatose almost aunt, no, great aunt, whatever she is, 104 years old, all at once comes alive and talks and has a pastry or has a scone, whatever it was, scone or something like that, and it's a miracle, and the next day she's dead. Now, this is interesting. I don't know if this is the... Are you familiar at all with Chris Vogler and the writer's journey and stuff like that? In the Joseph Campbell approach that he talks about, to know the Joseph Campbell structural approach, all you have to do is take my chart and connect the ends together and make a circle, because his structure is a circle. You start in the it starts in the ordinary, like a clock. It starts at 12 o'clock in the ordinary world. 3 o'clock, then there's a call to adventure, and at 3 o'clock the hero starts on, they refuse the call, then they go on the adventure. And what Chris talks about, Chris Vogler, and this is a book I highly recommend, by the way. You'd love this book. I know you probably have a long reading list, but you'd love this book, I think. It's just a terrific book for writers. It's called The Writer's Journey. But what Chris talks about a lot is the midpoint, which is the bottom of the clock, the bottom of the circle, is a moment of the lowest point for the character. And he says it's almost always accompanied by a death. Oh. So even without, I'm telling you, you were on the money there. So there's a death, and it's not contradictory. I always see it as quite a positive thing, because it always results in a bigger commitment from the hero, because that's what I've always discerned, and I never noticed this death thing. But then once I knew it, I started looking, like in Titanic, the ship hits the iceberg, and immediately people start dying. The water comes in, and the crew starts drowning, and oh my God, it's all about, it's a big death situation. And then in response to that, and it's not stated that I can recall quite so consciously, but it seemed very clear to me, it's like, okay, now I'm confronted with this death, and it instills in Lucy even a stronger idea that time is wasting. That, I don't have an infinite amount of time to be on the planet and get around to doing this thing. And so Boggy dies on page 189. Remember, 400-page book. This is the midpoint, or 3, whatever it is, but it's almost 400, and this is 11 pages shy of 200. And 3 pages later, she goes to Ethan and says, okay, I'm willing to date you. So in the first half of Act 2 in the chart, in the progress stage, she is saying, no, leave me alone, Ethan. I can't be sleeping with you. I want nothing to do with you now. You're just a friend because I'm going over here. And now she makes it, and remember, her goal is to win his love. The bigger commitment is, okay, now I'm committing to you. And the line, wait, I forgot I wanted to read a couple of things earlier, but the line there is, it's a great line just at the end of that chapter. Okay, the midpoint, wait, I've got it here. It says it's on page 202. And Ethan says to her, give me a chance, he says quietly. A cold fist squeezes my heart. Give me a chance to be with you. The right way this time. I open my mouth, then shut it, then try again. Ethan, you have to. His gaze is steady and sure. My heart, which wasn't too regular a few minutes ago, knocks wildly around in my chest. I do have to. I know it. It's just, okay, I whisper. And then it goes on with how she feels, and the chapter ends, I believe I'm in big trouble. Which is a great way to segue, because now she is going into that stage of complications and higher stakes. And I wanted to read, I forgot this, but I wanted to, in talking about her fear and identity, there are a couple passages that I think convey that wonderfully. On page 124, in terms of the fear, she says, I won't be having children with Ethan. God knows, let's be honest, it's not Ethan's link to Parker or Jimmy that stops me from being with him. It's the knowledge that I could really fall in love with Ethan, that I could love him in a way that would rip me in half if anything happened to him, that losing Ethan as I lost Jimmy could ruin me, and that this time I might not make it back. And whatever I could maybe feel for Ethan, however much he's done for me, nothing is worth that kind of pain again. And then she's talking to her newborn niece. No, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's her. Yeah, it's her, because she says, Auntie's okay, because she was crying. And then she says at the end of that chapter, Auntie's fine. I whisper again, stroking Emma's head with one hand. Auntie is just fine. Again, it's the recurrence of that word. It's like, I'm fine, this is fine, I've made my choice, can't go there because it's too scary. And then, on page, just bear with me. Oh, she's talking to Parker. And this is the identity she's taken on now. And he says, Parker's saying, I don't get this, why are you not dating him? And so on. He says, what if he died, I interrupt? What if I really am a black widow and I kill another Mirabelli boy, huh? What if one of those stupid things he does kills him? What if he got in a motorcycle accident? What if some idiot was driving over the Newport Bridge in a U-Haul and didn't see him and hit and crushed him? Or sent him right through the railing and over the edge and he broke every bone in his body and sank like a rock? What if he was out sailing and the boom swung around and hit him in the head and sent him overboard and he drowned? Or he was treading water waiting for help, but a shark came up and ate him, and we only found out because his leg washed up on shore. And her answer is, not that you've ever pictured any of this, of course. And then she says, and secondly, and then Parker says, Jimmy didn't do any of those things, did he? She was talking about all these unsafe things that Ethan does. He jumps, goes skydiving, skiing, which is a sport I didn't even know existed, but she jumps out of a helicopter to go skiing on a mountain or some crazy thing. He says, and Parker points out, well, Jimmy just didn't do anything, did he? And he still managed to die. My eyes feel a good point. She sits back down and contemplates me. You haven't said the big one yet, the big what if. Well, since you know everything, you just go ahead and say it for me, I mumble She gives a wry smile. Well, one could say that you do love Ethan already. The big question must be, what if you didn't love him as much as Jimmy? Hearing it said out loud like that, right here in the kitchen with the sun shining in the windows, my African violets blooming in the windowsill, it's a slap in the heart. I really don't want to talk about this, Parker, I whisper. She says, okay, I'm sorry. And then I change the subject.
What page is that?
That's page 186. So what she's doing is she's making up all these things because it's not she's claiming that it's all because what if I was a widow? But what's starting to emerge is there's really more going on. What also terrifies her is, what if she fell in love with Ethan, and was always comparing him to Jimmy, and he came up short, and think how she would be breaking his heart. Think how much pain she would be causing if she did that. So her identity is protecting her from more than just becoming a widow again. Okay. So, now, after she crosses the point of no return and starts trying to date Ethan, now the obstacles start coming faster, there's more conflict, but she is moving more steadily into her essence. And it's during this stage that a few things happen. One is, she starts tasting the desserts when she eats them, which she never could before. So she's starting to open up. She's starting to get more in touch with the truth of who she is. And the other thing, and she's starting to wear some of those clothes in the closet that she just kept locked away, so to speak, because she couldn't do that. So she is moving steadily toward this, and it seems to be working, but the obstacles are starting to build. You know, she keeps questioning this, and there's more and more and more going on. Now, when you get to the questions of the other characters, who is the reflection character? That's obvious to me, and that's Parker. Because, you know my definition of reflection, it's the character on the outer journey level who is helping the hero achieve her goal. Of everybody, the one who is most encouraging her to date and who takes her to the speed dating and isn't trying to set her up with some yutz who wouldn't be the right guy, is her best friend. But on the inner journey level, it's the character who holds your heroine's feet to the fire and repeatedly is going to say in one form or another, what the hell are you doing? This isn't you, just like that scene I just read. It's like she's saying, but this makes no sense. You know, Jimmy didn't do any of those things, and he's dead anyway. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And then, of course, points out what's really going on, because the reflection character is going to reveal the inner conflict of the hero and force her, in this case, to face it. Now, the Nemesis, the person who most stands in the way of her doing this, that's a tough one for me. You don't need to say now, but we're... Huh?
Not for me.
Oh, it isn't? Okay, well, I got to jump in. So before I say, I'll be true of what I wrote down. Who do you think it is?
The mother.
Oh, the mother.
All right.
It says so right here, the mother. Okay, because the reason I struggle with a bit is the mother doesn't, it's not like the mother is saying you can't date. I don't even remember that she's that discouraging about it. But on the inner journey level, she is spot on. An example of what I talked about yesterday when I said, ask the question, how is my hero unlike the reflection and like the Nemesis? And her mother is the epitome of someone who is settling for a life and not taking any risk. There's a dialogue, I think I marked it, so if I did, I'll read it in a second, where her mother just says, this is fine. She is the epitome of someone whose life is fine. She just gets along, and that's okay, and that's enough for her, or at least she claims it is. We don't really get into any arc for her, but on that level, that's why I picked her, because she is so clearly filling that function in the movie. And then the romance character, which is probably not that big a mystery, would be Ethan. And then, structurally, the major setback of the story is Ethan getting hit by the car. Because look what happens as a result of that. When the hero suffers, remember, right before the major setback, the hero usually feels, or the heroine usually feels like, success is just almost in my grasp. I can almost touch it. And then something just goes all to shit and sends the heroine for a loop. That's the major setback. And in response, the hero is going to try and retreat into her identity. And so now we're getting to the, up into the last act. So now we're up to page 335. And this is the passage that I picked. It says, she's talking to her mother. Her mother says, "Sweetie, I know you're hurting over Ethan, but look at it this way. Life's going to be a lot less complicated if you stay home, stay alone. It doesn't sound very exciting, but there's a lot to be said for playing it safe." And then she thinks to herself, as the narrator says, "I'm not. She sure has a point. Ethan was not safe. Not for me, not from me, and we'll both be better off. I can't live life fearing that every time my husband leaves the house, I'll never see him again. Life will be clean and smooth like this living room, maybe. Not really the place you'd choose to be, but not bad just the same." She's actually going to that place that has been her comfort zone, the place where she's just all by herself watching the old video. And then there is a revelation that comes. Now, this one doesn't come precisely from a reflection character. I mean, Parker's been trying to point out to her, this is not who you are, this is not who you are. But the revelation, and I didn't write this down, I'm not going to get the name exactly. The revelation actually comes earlier, in a way. We don't understand it from, is it Granelda? And it's, look at the toast. And we'll wait before I ask you this, but I'm dying to know how you came up with that, because that totally got me. I never saw that one coming. But then the actual revelation is when she looks at the wedding video one more time. And now we're up to page 379, and you say, no, this isn't the passage of the revelation. The revelation is she looks and she sees that, she looks at it again and again, and finally she notices in that moment right after the toast that Ethan gives, she sees just a brief glimpse of his face when nobody's looking, and she realizes, my God, he did love me then. He is giving me up for the sake of his brother. He wasn't just, the little brother who become the best friend, or the friend with benefits or whatever. And so her transformative moment then, and then in the same video, of course, then she sees Jimmy's face, and she sees the guilt that verifies the fact that Jimmy knew Ethan was in love with her and took her anyway for himself. So the transformative moment, though, that's the revelation. But the actual moment we see that she is willing to put everything on the line and really take that final step toward courage, or to move in fully into her essence, is to me in the cemetery. And she finally decides to go see Jimmy's grave. And this is the passage. I love this passage. She says, "It's so hard to say goodbye to someone you love, even if he's already gone, even if he left you first. For so long I've been Jimmy's widow. Maybe being widowed again wasn't the thing I feared. Maybe it was being more than a widow. Maybe it was this exact moment. I'll always love you, Jimmy," I whisper, "but I need to leave you now." And what I love about that is this idea that all this book we felt like, and she's been claiming and so on, that her deepest fear was that she would be widowed again. And her real fear was not that. Her real fear was letting go of being a widow. Because, of course, that's her comfort zone. That's her identity. Her identity is being a widow. And there's such a payoff for being that. There's such a payoff to claim that fear, because it's legitimate. It sounds perfectly legitimate. Of course you're scared. Of course you're doing this. Of course that. What she's really afraid of is letting go of her widowhood and actually going forward and living her life fully again. And when she realizes that, and then is willing to go from the cemetery to the opening party to really confront him, it's Kristen's version of the race to the wedding. Because notice she's taking the long way around, and the party's going on, and she's got to get there. I've got to tell him. I've got to tell him. Now she isn't necessarily. Well, actually, I think she does start running at the end. But it's always like, I can't waste any more time. I've got to get there. I can't lose this thing that I now realize is my destiny. So the final push is her run to the grand opening. The climax is when she makes her declaration of love, and he returns it, and she's won. She has achieved her outer motivation and won his love, and that brings the aftermath. Now the aftermath is quite clear. I think you wrote it as an epilogue, and you move ahead a year or so, or maybe it's not quite a year, but she's pregnant.
Yeah.
So the aftermath is they're together, they're going to live happily. But what also I want you to notice in the aftermath is that thing I was talking about the hero bringing back the elixir to the village. Everybody in her little village is living better because of the courage she found, or the courage she inspired other people to have. Because look what's happening. Ethan, did I say Jimmy before? Nope. Okay. Ethan, who was living his own sort of trap, selling that fake food or whatever it was, but just because he didn't really want to be involved with this family that was pretty awful to him. It seemed to me I didn't like those parents at all because, they just relegated him to, second born, and they were not very, they were pretty obvious about the fact that they loved Jimmy best and so on. So he just wanted to avoid that, but now he's come back. He sort of confronted them and stood up to them, and now he's doing what he had longed to do. He's a chef running the restaurant, but it's not his parents' restaurant. It's the building, but he's completely turned it into his own, redecorated it. So he's transformed himself, but not just that. Even the Black Widows are now doing more, starting to live more. One of them's either she's not going on a date, she's been talking about it, but they're and they're not just changing their attitude toward Lucy, but they're opening up and they're letting go of this sort of rigid control over the bakery. And they're going to Starbucks and getting hot chocolate all the time and so on. And even the character of Doral Ann is now, they've resolved that issue that also grew out of this painful experience in the past that she had. And we've seen a whole dimension to her we haven't, and now she's working there. And she says, she may never be my best friend, but we're getting along because now that has healed. And even, it starts a little bit before the very climax, but even Corinne, the absolute neurotic about her husband doing anything to take any risk. She had the same sort of issue, is now becoming okay with that. She's now at least letting him go out the door a little bit. So as a result of the transformation of the heroine, other people are now empowered to transform and their lives are improved. It's like the curse is lifted off the village, is the mythical way of thinking of it. The hero comes back with the elixir or the Holy Grail or whatever it is, now the whole village can prosper. And that's it. So now that you've heard how wonderful that book is, now you can say whatever you want, but right. Mostly tell us what it...
Can I have the copy of the book?
Oh, you should read this. It's good.
Like this? I just wanted to read you here's how I came to write this book. I had written 3 books before this, and my 3rd book was Too Good to Be True, which remains the only book I never passed in on deadline. It was the hardest book I've ever written. I threw it away 3 weeks before my deadline and started writing it again. I had to call my agent. I was crying for the only time I've ever cried to my agent to say, I think I can't do this. I can't write a book anymore. I think the jig is up, and it's clear that I'm not really a novelist. So I went to RWA, and I was feeling very discouraged. I didn't know what I was going to write next. I didn't know if my publisher would like Too Good to Be True, and I went to Michael's class. And I sat there silent, which those of you who know me know how rare that is. And I just listened, and I thought, now I know how to write a book. I had all these elements in my book, but I didn't know what they were. I didn't know how I found them. I felt like I had been crawling around in a coal mine looking for stuff, and Michael just flipped on the lights and handed me a shovel. So the inscription in this book, which I sent him when it came out, was, before we were friends, Michael, I'm not sure I could have written this book without the benefit of your wisdom. Thank you. So that's before we were friends. So this book is a result of Michael's teaching, and I don't think I could have written, 14 books since then. So that's how I started to write the book. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about, how it evolved and stuff. But a lot of us who write romance write the tropes, and this is the widow trope. The widow has to find the courage to find love again. A lot of us have written that book. In a lot of books about widows, you have a widow who lost her husband and mourns him, but he wasn't really the love of her life. The new hero is, she really knows what love is now that she's got her second guy. I didn't want to do that. I wanted Jimmy to be the love of her life. And I come from a family of widows. My mom is a widow. I have the black widows are my aunts, except they swear more. And so I wanted to write about a family like that, where being stuck is kind of a way of life, not an unhappy life, So I wanted to have this heroine who had a family history, which would make it harder for her to move on, because nobody moves on. You're widowed, it's okay. No big deal. It happens to us all. And of course it is a big deal. But I also wanted the hero to be someone very difficult for her to love. So, the hero's best friend, the dead husband's best friend, is another classic. I thought, yeah, that's too easy. And then I thought, well, how about his brother? Because that brings a whole other set of complications. Now, I'd already done a brother-in-law hero, and after this book, my publisher politely asked that I never make another brother-in-law hero. But I wanted someone linked to Jimmy, someone who she could really love, someone who might die young, and clearly Ethan's job, all those helicopter skiing events, make him a high risk, and someone whose death would affect other people that she loved. She says to Parker, what if I kill another Mirabelli boy? So I tried to make him the most difficult hero in her world. Michael asked yesterday, he said, why is this hero the one for her, other than the fact that they're in the movie? That he sees her essence and stuff. My question when writing a romance is also always, and why is he the worst person for her? So situationally, Ethan is the worst person for her. The brother, the guy she could love, this high-risk guy, her best friend. She has a lot to lose if their relationship doesn't work. And I wanted to also, because this is a very simple story, she goes from widow to wife. That's her transformation. Can I use your microphone? I think this one's a little squeakier.
I think this is worse. But
oh, okay.
Yeah, you give it a try. Better
is this better?
That one off, though.
This one's off. Better? Okay. So I wanted to make things as difficult as possible, because it is a pretty straightforward book. It's no secret she loves Ethan. It's no secret he's the hero. They're best friends from day one. They don't have to meet. They don't have to fall in love. That's already happened. So I wanted the plot to be as complicated as possible, and to have Lucy constantly reminded of her identity as widow. She's constantly called Jimmy's widow. And I reread the book last night, because I haven't read it for 5 years. And I kept finding, wow, I didn't realize how often I put in Jimmy's widow, Jimmy's widow. Every time she takes a step forward, she's called Jimmy's widow. There's that scene where Ethan has been away, and they're dating now, and she goes out with Jimmy Light, the bread guy, and she feels a little guilty about finding him attractive and stuff, and so she's home with Ethan, and she thinks he deserves a little sweetness from me, so they start making out, and they start making love, and then his parents walk in, and the mom says, Ethan, what are you doing to Jimmy's wife? You know? And so every time she makes a step towards being Ethan's, someone calls her Jimmy's. So there was Jimmy Light, who looked so much like her husband. There's the Black Widows in the history. There's Lucy's hope that Ethan and Parker will get back together because she thinks they're so good together and they've made this beautiful baby, and why don't they keep it up? And in her world, in her identity, what more do you want? You know, you like each other, you had enough chemistry to have a baby together, you're good parents. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And then another complication was Dorlan's history with Jimmy, that she finds out that Jimmy slept with Dorlan, who has hated her all her life, and that Ethan knew about that and kept it from her. So she has this perceived betrayal on Ethan's part. And then, as Michael said, Gianni and Marie, that, you know, these parents who don't really want her to be anything but their firstborn son's wife. They say it's okay for her to date, and then what do? They decide to move to Arizona because they can't bear to see that. And they really are crap parents to Ethan. But he's a crappy son to them too. You know, he does his job of representing the company that makes instead of eating, drink this, you know, is a slap in his father's face. And he takes that job after Jimmy takes Lucy. So it's not an accident that he works for that company, that he doesn't finish school to become a chef. And Michael pointed out the metaphors and similes that I have of her being trapped. You know, they live on an island. She can't go through the center of town. She can't go through the cemetery. So she's always going around things. She's always avoiding Jimmy's death, her clothes, the bakery. And then, you know, the hard part for me, and we were talking about this in our groups this morning, the hard part for me in this book was to find an outer goal for her. Because this is not the story about a woman who wants to become a pastry chef. This is a story about a woman who has to get over her husband's death. And I think that I felt like it was a very light outer goal. And a lot of my books have very light outer goals. That I don't have, you know, I've got to save the orphanage or get my sister back from the kidnappers. My goals are always very quiet. And it works. It works for me. But none of my books has been optioned as a movie either. So, so there's maybe something to that, to having that nice outer goal. One thing that I wanted to say, you know, when we talk about the revelation of Check the Toast, that doesn't really come from Grinelda. That comes from Jimmy. And that's what I loved about that. Jimmy tells her in the beginning of the book, through this goofy, half gypsy, half electrolysis woman who pretends to be a medium, that she actually does get a message from the great beyond, and it is a valued message. And I had fun screwing with that, you know, with the fact that someone was making toast right at that minute, and it was ready, just as Grinelda said, check the toast. But there it was all along, waiting for Lucy to see it, and that in my head, Jimmy is the one who wants her with Ethan, and those dimes that she finds happen at moments when she's had conflicts with Ethan that she feels are insurmountable. Every time she finds a dime in the story, she's feeling really low about Ethan or her life not being with somebody, and he's giving her little hints. I did a lot of research on a widow's website where they have young widows and widowers talking about this stuff, and dimes came up again and again. So I've gotten a lot of good mail about that from widows. Let's see. I found that this was one of my 2 gift books that I've ever written. I've written now 18 manuscripts, and 16 of them will be published, and 2 will never see the light of day. But this was one of the books that came easily, one of the 2, this and Catch of the Day. And I really do think it was because I had such a clean arc, widow to wife, And because I was fresh from Michael's class, I had my map, my flashlight, and my shovel, and so it was a real joy to write. And a lot of this book comes from, as I said, my personal family experience. And Declan, don't tell Grammy, but aside from her wardrobe, the mother in this book is my mother, very happily stuck in her identity as a widow. Has never been on another date and all that stuff. And I thought it would be hard to be her daughter if I was widowed, and from this line of widows, where you get one guy and that's it. What would it be like? And that's where a lot of my books start. What would it be like if you were that person in that situation? I loved to write two scenes, especially in this book. I loved writing the scene where Ethan is hit by the car, because for Lucy to have the dark night of the soul there, she has to think that Ethan is dead, just like Jimmy died. And so for her to see him hit by a car and Jimmy died in a car accident, that had to be the moment. We were waiting for Jimmy, and I don't know if you guys were surprised was anyone surprised that Ethan almost died in this book, or that she thought he almost died? Because she had to face that. She had to face that probability, that she had to face it head on, and that she can't handle it. And in the hospital room, some guy sticks his head and he says, "Aren't you Jimmy Mirabelli's widow?" And that just sort of brings it home. She is not Ethan Mirabelli's girlfriend. She's Jimmy's widow. And then the scene that I could not wait to write and wrote with, tears streaming down my face, almost unable to see the screen, was her going into the cemetery for the first time. And that's the kind of scene that we writers wait for. I was waiting for 315 pages to start that scene, because I knew that she would have to go to the cemetery and go to Jimmy's grave and say goodbye to him. And I loved writing that scene. I loved that she finally realizes she's the one who has to leave. She's the one who has to leave his memory behind and move on in life. And so when she's finally able to do that after 5 years, were you crying, Paul? Yay! Oh, good. When
Only
she's
in this room would someone say, "Oh, good."
Yay! I know.
Because you always make me cry.
Yay,
I love
sobbing.
that. So true.
But that was no character of mine has ever suffered as much as Lucy, with the loss of her, starting with her uncle sliding out of the casket, to her dad, to Jimmy. No one has had as much to overcome emotionally as Lucy. And there's poor Ethan, who's so good and so true from the first time we meet him onward. But Lucy she has such a long and difficult journey to complete before she can get there. That I think, it was very rewarding to write her book because of that, because it was so profound. So, do you have any questions, Michael? Or do you guys have?
I do. I have some prepared. It was better when I said it just here, I think. Maybe if I said it between us, we could both use it. I had a few prepared that I want to ask. Some of those, some you answered, but as a result of what you just said, I'm curious about a couple of things. One, has your mom read this book?
My mom loves this book, and she does not recognize herself as a character. I think it's because Lucy's mother dresses so well, and my mom doesn't like clothes, and she usually wears like fleece sweatpants and a Yankees shirt. So, she's read it.
Okay, yeah, I guess there's a certain little denial going on there about recognizing it. Because I thought it was funny when you said to Declan, "Don't tell her," and I really, she hasn't figured it out for herself yet. Heroine has a mother, and also. This isn't so much a question, but I didn't realize. I knew it was a message from Jimmy, but I didn't really think about it. The reason I said it was from Granelda is because she's the one who first says it. Yeah. But I thought at the end what we're learning is that she really was psychic across the board, and she was just a goofy one who. All those things, I see an F or whatever it was, and she knows the woman's, husband's name was Fred or whatever, but I just thought, oh, well, that's what they wanted to hear, but she really is psychic. It sounds like you thought, no, she really wasn't, but then this one moment she heard Jimmy. which I thought was sort of a cool way of looking at it. So you said this book came easy, but do you remember as you were writing, was there any place that was really a hurdle to overcome? You were really stuck, or any section that you had to really rewrite, or that caused you real problems?
I think the hardest aspect of this was bringing in Matt DeSalvo, Jimmy Light, as a character, because I didn't love him, and I didn't want, obviously I didn't want Lucy to end up with him, but to make it valid that she would be attracted to him, and to make the reader understand without hating her, because I did get a little hate mail like, how could Lucy not see that, it was like, yes, she does see that Ethan is the one, but if I let her do that right away, we would only have one chapter.
Wait a minute, you got hate mail about what?
But people saying Lucy did not appreciate Ethan soon enough, and I think, yeah, well, it is a novel, and things have to happen, so.
And that generated really hate mail, or is that just your
not
term
hate
for
mail,
negative
but
emails?
Negative mail saying I didn't like Lucy because she didn't love Ethan, and I think that happens a lot in romance. Our readers are mostly women who are in love with our heroes, and they don't understand the woman who rejects them, because they're like, hey, I would take him, So, not really knowing maybe story arc and that kind of thing, they think, why wasn't she with him in chapter 1? And I said, because then that wouldn't be a book. So Matt DeSalvo was a hard character because I didn't want to push the coincidence factor too far. So he looks like Jimmy. He represents an opportunity for her to stay in her identity as more of a bread baker than she is right now. She can be even more successful as a bread baker, make money for the bakery, save the bakery, which is slowly dying, and also give her that Mr. Not So Bad that she's been looking for. Because at this point in the book, she is with Ethan, and so that was tricky. And this was only my 4th book or 5th book, so I was still a new writer. I'm not sure how well I did it. Rereading the book last night, I thought, oh, it's not quite the masterpiece I thought it was.
Really? Now, why did you say that? What did you dislike about it, or what did you say? Oh God, I wish I could go back and.
Well, one thing that leaped off the page to me was how many synonyms I used for the word "said." Sorry, Peter. There was a lot of growling, grunting, attempting, stammering, screeching, whispering, just that kind of thing. And there was a lot of repetition, that she has the same struggle over and over during the course of the book. It's, one step towards Ethan, a half step back, again, for 200 pages.
And how would you, if that is a problem, how would you correct that now? Or how do you deal with that now in books that you're reading now?
I think that giving Lucy some emotional intelligence, that she knows what she's doing, even though it is emotionally immature in a way, that she recognizes that, helped. And I try to do that now more with my books, that my heroines are more aware of their flaws and habits that get them into trouble. And so they acknowledge them a little bit more obviously than Lucy does. Because Lucy she's a victim for a lot of the book. She's trying, but she's definitely still very content to be the poor widow.
So when you said that, like I forget it, the nature med guy, what's his name? Matt. You said at what point in the process does that struggle occur? I mean, are you writing drafts and now you have to rewrite scenes, or is this all in outline stage before you really dive in?
This was during the writing of the first draft, and I realized I need something more to happen. I need Ethan and Lucy to be tested against Jimmy, basically, and a representation of Jimmy. And so I introduced this guy, and I thought, like, is this too heavy-handed? Is this too much? How can I make it work so that she comes across someone who looks and reminds her so much of Jimmy, not just her, but everybody. It's like Jimmy's back. His parents cry. Ethan is shaken by how much he looks like him. The Black Widows are distressed. So it's definitely a reminder of what she's lost and a potential of having the same thing again. So.
But what I was asking is, so does that difficulty mean you're rewriting scenes over and over to work it out, or you're working it out in your head?
Yeah, I rewrite a lot. I probably rewrote that section of the book 5 times to try to get it to the level where I felt it was acceptable and believable and not so heavy-handed.
So let me ask you this. So when you're writing the Matt DeSalvo, your challenge then was not making sure that she never had the idea, I really could love this guy. It had to be always, he'll be good enough.
Yeah, and also like, she can't be pushed off the path towards Ethan by Matt at this point in the story. That comes when Ethan gets hit by the car. So it's all about the two of them at this point. But he's there. He's waiting. Matt DeSalvo is waiting. And for both things, for the bread and for Lucy, because he's interested in dating Lucy. And he's completely fine with her being the tragic widow. So, Ethan is the one who's urging her to be more than that and everything. And to be more than just the bread baker. And he says, like, do what you want, make your own decision. And she's sort of irritated. She thinks, like, well, Jimmy would have made a list for me by now, and Ethan's just making me think by myself, So, I forgot. I lost my train of thought. What was the question?
So she never has a moment. You had to make sure that she never had a moment where she looks into Matt's eyes and she says, "Yeah,
No.
I could love him. What if I did this with?" Although
No,
it sounds
he's
like
definitely-
really incestuous. I mean, really.
He's definitely someone she could settle for.
But only settle.
Only settle, yeah.
And she has to be really clear about
Yeah.
that throughout.
In fact, there's a scene when she's driving back on the date with Matt, and she thinks she just all of a sudden misses Ethan so much that she can hardly breathe, and she knows who the love of her life is. She just doesn't want the love of her life. She
And
wants.
she has that moment in the car
Yeah.
where she is with the wrong man and is thinking about the right man.
Yeah. So, like Michael said, she's put her identity back on, but it doesn't fit as well as it used to. So, that was that.
The thing about him, to me, it's an illustration of the two things I said yesterday that are critical when you have a triangle. One, he embodies her identity. It's not that he embodies that he's the same way. It's that he offers the nature-made offer is it's a doorway into being able to settle even more easily, because now there's no threat to the bakery, and now she's not just baking bread for the village, she's baking bread for the tri-state area or whatever it's going to be. So she would get even more mired in this settling with him. And the other is you can't have your reader upset about the guy who gets dumped. So if he was just a shit, that would be okay. But in this case, that wouldn't have worked, and that wasn't it. But what, to me, I thought was skillfully done is, it's not like he falls head over heels for her. I mean, in his mind, all I could extract from what he was doing is, he was attracted to her and thought, well, we might have fun on a date, and he wasn't going ahead of that at all. He was just,
No.
So
He
when
was a
they're
nice
on the
guy.
date, the worst you can say is he was kind of shocked and
He's
surprised.
exactly what she asked for in the beginning.
Yeah.
She said, I want a decent guy that I can be attracted to, but I won't love. And there he is.
Yeah. But her behavior in that date and just running away from him and so on, it was like, it was probably, I picture him thinking, thank God I didn't have any more dates with her, because that was not meant to be, but he's still happy to just sell her bread. That was really the big thing for him. Why don't we open it up for questions? I have a few more, but I'll mix mine in with yours, but I want to hear what other people would like to hear. Yes.
I just wanted to say, Kristen, that I particularly liked Matt, Jimmy Light, because I thought as a function in that book, that not only, I really liked that she found him less and less like Jimmy the more she knew him.
Yeah.
And I really liked that it forced her to take action, it forced her to choose, to make a choice. And it, kind of, without him being pushy or really, and it just by virtue of him being there, she then had to, on her own, with her own as a character herself, make a choice and drive her own fortune for to the future. She had to take responsibility for that, and I thought he was a great character.
Good.
And my willing suspension of disbelief was perfectly fine with him thinking, I didn't think in any way he was heavy-handed. I thought he did well.
Good.
And I'm not trying to suck up.
Thank you.
But it's okay if you are.
Yeah,
We don't mind that, either of us up here.
I like it.
There was a... Okay, yeah.
For Kristen and Michael, as far as point of view, Kristen, what point of view do you like to write from? And maybe Michael, do you have any comments about points of view in terms of Hollywood? I guess it's usually a mission with the films, right?
A little louder if you could.
Well, I want to ask Kristen, first of all, what's her preferred point of view when she's writing? And then from you, do you have any comments about point of view, and do you have any preferences about that as far as novels?
Okay, so the question was, do I prefer one point of view from another? I write both first person and third person, and I write one narrator, two narrators, and in my upcoming book there'll be two female narrators but no male narrators. So I love to write first person because I think that it's very intimate. You are that person and you only know what she knows, and what she tells you is the truth is her perception of the truth. Like Lucy tells herself that Ethan is not that hurt over them breaking up when he really is. But you're right there in that person's skin. So it's a very intimate connection with the reader. That being said, I do love also to write in third person. I still try to keep it very deep point of view so that it's not like you're being told about this person. You're still experiencing the world from her eyes and his eyes. It took a little practice to write the male point of view, just because I'm not a guy. I don't know if anybody knows that, but so I look at my husband and I think, would he say that? No. Men are more action-oriented and less likely to spew about their emotions.
Some men.
Except for Michael, right? So it goes back and forth, I was really happy to take a break from first person, and then after, I think, 6 books or 7 books in third person, male, female point of view, I was really happy to go back to first person. So.
I didn't understand what you were at. Did you want to ask me something with regard to...
Anything to say about point of view in terms of novels? Do you have a preference for one or the other?
No. It just, if it works for the story. It does. To be honest, if I'm reading a novel, it hardly enters my mind. I just mentioned a book yesterday that I just finished reading that I really liked a lot, called The Girl on the Train. And kind of the conceit of the novel is, it is written all present tense with 3 separate narrators, 3 women narrators, and it works to me really brilliantly. But one of the reasons that works so well in that particular novel is because there are lots of things we're wondering for a good portion of the book, like, why did we switch to this other woman? Because this other woman doesn't have anything to do with the first woman, seemingly, and then we see, oh, I see. And so it's the advantage to you as the writer there is a much more limited perspective. It's not, maybe this is exactly what you're saying, but it's not just the truth filtered through them. It's just there are things that each of these women don't know that we'll find out from the other women, and the whole question is eventually, how are these 3 going to come together? And but that's also wrapped in a mystery, and that's about all I have to say. So it works very well for that, but generically, no. And it may be partly because I come from Hollywood, where it's not quite the same kind of issue. There are sort of stricter rules, because when you have a hero, you're pretty much going to watch that movie from the hero's point of view, and the only real issue is, are you going to cut away from the hero at all or frequently in order to create anticipation of what's going to happen to the hero? And some movies you just stay and not, but that was a long answer to what should have been short. No, I have no preference. In the very, very back row. Yes?
Yeah, so the question was, first she said she loved the book. And then the question was, I referenced Lucy having the sensation of a pebble in her throat, which is just a classic anxiety feeling that something is stuck in your throat. But it's also a great metaphor because, she's choking off part of herself, and so she's unable to say what she really feels, and she's strangling that part of herself that is that loving, open-hearted woman who's willing to take a chance on the person that she loves. So.
A couple more questions. Yes. No, not you. Right there.
So in terms of the mail that you got, Kristen, about Lucy being clueless, basically, to Ethan's charms, how do the two of you kind of, or how have you learned over time to make that it's subtle enough that you as a reader don't get frustrated, that as soon as you get a glimpse of what the essence is, that the person's clinging to their identity isn't frustrating. Like, you're like, come on now, if I were in that situation, I certainly would have, X, Y, or Z.
Right.
So how do you make it natural to go from the identity to essence rather than feel like you're intentionally blocking them just to make the book right?
The answer is different for every book. How do you walk your characters from identity to essence without your readers getting frustrated that it's taking so long? Again, I think if they're aware of their flaws, it helps. Like those conversations that Lucy has with Parker help because she's saying, look, I know what Ethan represents, and I'm not ready to go there. I don't ever want to be ready to go there.
For me, what helped is when he said, you have to give us a chance, because, we can't see his perspective,
right,
because then we would know how much he loves her and everything. But when he acknowledges what she's not willing to, at that point, I forgave her for being so, blind, what seemed like blind.
She can't stay away from him, She's always going up to his house to leave food. And that's that little glimmer in her identity that she wants more. She's a bread baker who makes fabulous desserts for one guy, and she brings him these little treats in the middle of the night. So I don't think it's that she's clueless. It's that she just doesn't want to go there. That's what I tried to do, but it was a long time ago, and I wasn't maybe as facile as I might be today.
But that's something you've worked on getting smoother.
Yeah, I try to make my heroines very aware, because I don't know about you guys, but when you read a book and you're like, wait, I love him, you want to smack the character, like, really? You didn't know that? It just dropped on your head like that? I want the character to be in touch with her feelings and as much as they've suffered in the past, as much baggage as they have, to acknowledge that, to say, that's, yeah, sure, but that's just not me.
I think, to me, it's also to always keep in mind it's an arc. It's not an aha moment. There is what you might call an aha moment, that final revelation that's the final step that leads to that transformative, push into full essence. But it's growth. It's going from fully an identity and then testing out or experiencing one's essence more and more and more as the story progresses. And you want to try and create a story where your hero is sort of forced to do that in order to do what they want to do. I mean, it's not like she just gets tired of the life she has and then says, okay, I'm going to take a shot with Ethan. It's like, well, I said I wanted to date, and then this isn't working, so maybe I can get a little closer. And when she finally says, it's like, that's why I read that. I love that, because he says, give us a chance, and she says, okay, and she whispers it. I don't know if I read that line. It's not like, yes, no, it's like, okay, and then she immediately says, I knew I was in big trouble. She's very much vacillating, but it's not like, and then it all goes to crap. They start making it work or trying to make it work, and she's getting some more and more and more. She is not the same woman on page 300 as she was on page 100. And so you keep moving in that direction. It's not like stuck, you know, saved or something like that. I think just always look at it as vacillation, but a gradual move from identity to essence, if that helps. Just a couple more things I wanted. I have some. I want to ask you some career sort of questions. First, back when before we met, I think you said, or let's go back to two places. One before you ever had been published. Okay, you had some picture in your mind. Now, you probably didn't back then think, maybe you did, maybe you're really ambitious to say, someday I'm going to have 14 published books. What is the number now?
I think it's 14.
14.
Yeah.
I think at that point, maybe you were thinking, God, if I could just get a book published. Yeah. Okay, but you had some picture in your mind of what a successful career would be as a writer or romance writer. Mm-hmm. What's the difference between the picture you had back then and the reality of it?
Well, when I first started writing, my kids were really little. Declan was in nursery school, and that's when I'd write the 6 hours a week that he was at school. and I thought, if I could just keep being a stay-at-home mom and sell a couple little books and make as much as I would, say, as a bartender, then that would be great, and that's all I need. And I remember, my first book was my first finished manuscript. So I was lucky. It was fast. The timing was right. I had a great agent. And I remember thinking, I just want to hold my book in my hands. And I told that to my agent, and she said, "Oh, you all say that at first." And then, then you start wanting a little bit more. You think well, I would love to have more people reading my books, and then once that happens, you're well, I'd really like to hit a list, and then that happens, and then you're well, that was great, but I'd really like to be in the top 10 on the list, and so on and so forth. But I started writing in my little living room. We have a little house, and then my husband made me an office in the cellar, and I was very happy in the cellar. I had a little space heater because it was cold, and now I have an office above my neighbor's garage. It's in a little apartment and stuff. And I got sent on book tour this year to Europe and the Midwest, and I get invited to speak at conferences and travel and all this stuff. And I never imagined anything like that. My career is a lot bigger now. It's definitely a career, whereas before it was just me and my computer. And I miss those days. Those were very innocent, quiet days where I had no Facebook page, no Twitter, I never got asked to do interviews or anything like that. And it was very simple. But what I found is that the days that are just like that, when I'm just me in my chair and my laptop, those are the best days of my career. Going to Europe is great. I'm not going to lie. It was fantastic. But the most satisfaction I get is the same satisfaction I had when I wrote my first book. And I think if you lose that, then you should change jobs.
So what's your essence?
My essence? Yeah. Oh, I don't know.
You just said, I think.
All right, Michael knows what it is. He's going to tell you.
Well, no, you said, you actually anticipated my very last question, which was, what is the biggest high for you? And you already said.
Yeah.
Her essence is when she's sitting there in the writing of it. It's what is her truth is the question. And that sounded both, I know Kristen, but also just in the way you said it, it very much sounded to me like a statement coming from someone's truth.
All right.
Right? Isn't that's it? So that is it. And, the identity stuff sounded like the early part of your story when you said, you just wanted to hold your book in your hand. She said that. I think there's a certain degree of fear in allowing yourself to think way ahead like that.
Yeah.
Because then it's like I'm setting myself up for failure, or who am I to dream that big? Mm-hmm. And that's okay. I know they say dream big, but I think that's fine. It's fine to say, I just want to do this. Anything's fine if it gets you into your essence. And if your essence is you're a writer, you're a storyteller, then then that's all that really matters. I am curious about one thing in that story. Why a bartender?
Oh, I'm a good bartender.
It was,
Yeah.
it was sort of like, say, as
Shawnee?
long
Where's Shawnee? Am I a good bartender?
you've been a person.
I'm a mixologist, really.
I mean, it was sort of like, if I could just make as much as I would as a hooker, I think I'd be okay.
Well, that's another skill, but my son is in the room, so ignoring me. No, I waited tables in college and tended bar, and it was an easy way to make some money, and we were poor. So.
Okay, and I guess the last question then is, it's maybe, let me see if I can word it properly. So suppose you could right now go back in time and talk to the Kristen who'd never published anything. What would you tell her, or what would you advise her back then that you didn't know back then to do? What would you advise her to do maybe differently than you did to get where you are? Or what would you advise anyone in that situation right now? But what would you advise yourself if you could go back and talk to her then?
I think I would tell myself the only thing that matters in your career is this story, the one you're working on right now. Your sales don't matter, your social media presence doesn't matter, who else is getting better sales than you doesn't matter, because you have no control over those things. You only control the book and how good it is. So if you're in the story with your character, and that's the only way I can write, is to basically become the characters, then you're doing the right thing. And that's the only thing that will make you successful too. But you have to kind of cut out all those other extras and just focus on that one book that you're writing right now.
Okay, well, it happens to be 1 o'clock lunchtime.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
I was
Michael.
not doing this, but for sharing knowledge.